I want to start with a quotation from a book that was written and published in 1952 originally. It says, a generation ago, there were dire discrepancies between Genesis 1 and the findings of science, and especially this was true of astronomy. The attack of the critic came primarily through the sciences, and the faith of many young people was wrecked because they thought the Bible was in serious error and therefore could no longer be trusted. This was part of the preface to a book called Science Speaks, by Dr. Peter Stoner. I want to make sure I have the right message up here. And the official publication of this was in 1958, so it's a bit dated. But what Dr. Stoner had going for him was that he was a prolific and renowned mathematician. He was the chairman of the departments of mathematics and astronomy at Pasadena City College until 1953. He was chairman of the science division, Westmont College, professor emeritus of science, Westmont College, professor emeritus of mathematics and astronomy, Pasadena City College. I mention that because when you are going to do a scientific paper, and for those of you who are out there who are science or math nerds, you're probably going to love this message. The rest of us are going to get through it to get to the point. I'll try to make it somewhat fun, but there's an important message here for us. Dr. Stoner's idea was, since he was working for a Christian college, was to figure out a way to stop this tide against our college kids. And as a mathematician, his objective was to study and prove the Bible is true scientifically. So one of the ways in which he decided to go about doing this was to look at fulfilled prophecy. Now, there are a number of prophecies that he looked at in the Old Testament and then their fulfillment. And I'm not going to deal with all of those because I want to zero in as we come into the Passover season on the prophecies that he looked at regarding the Messiah. Now, this is important because he's asking the question. Essentially, he's asking the students to ask themselves a question about the validity of the Bible, and that is, did God prophesy things about a Messiah through his prophets, and did they come true? And if that happened, what is the probability that that could have happened randomly without God? Or that man could have made that happen for himself, that Christ could have been a fraud and could have made these things happen for himself to appear as he was the Messiah. So it's a probability study. And as we get to the end of this probability study, you're going to realize that it is virtually impossible that God did not both inspire those prophecies but also their fulfillment, which should absolutely convict you that the Bible is the Word of God, that God is the inspirer of that Word, and that we can absolutely have confidence that he has revealed his truth to us in this Bible, in his Word. So I'm going to walk through this today. And just to give you just a bit of support for this, the foreword to Dr. Stoner's book was written by Harold Hartzler. He was a PhD of the American Scientific Affiliation. So they took their study, submitted it for peer review, and this was part of the foreword from Dr. Hartzler. He says, the manuscript for Science Speaks has been carefully reviewed by a committee of the American Scientific Affiliation members and by the executive council of the same group, and has been found in general, to be dependable and accurate in regard to the scientific material presented. The mathematical analysis included is based upon principles of probability, which are thoroughly sound, and Professor Stoner has applied these principles in a proper and convincing way. Okay. So again, this study is really meant to subdue any speculation that Jesus Christ, or anyone else for that matter, could have manipulated events to ensure that they fulfilled prophecies about the Messiah, to claim that they were the Messiah. The evidence is so overwhelming against even the possibility as to remove all doubt. that he was the prophesied Messiah and that the Bible is infallible in proving it. Now, a couple of other things. Regarding the analysis conducted, Dr. Stoner wrote the following. He said, the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at Pasadena City College sponsored a class in Christian evidences. One section of the work of the class was to consider the evidence produced by the fulfilled prophecies referring to the first advent of Christ. The students were asked to be very conservative in their probability estimates. They discussed each prophecy at length, bringing out various conditions which might affect the probability of any man fulfilling it. After discussion, the students agreed unanimously on a definite estimate as being both reasonable and conservative. At the end of the evaluations, the students expressed their feelings thus. We don't use that word when we speak anymore, do we? Thus, but that 1950s. They expressed their feelings thus. If anyone were able to enter into the discussions and help in placing the estimates as they had done, that person would certainly agree that the estimates were conservative. The estimates used in this chapter are a combination of the estimates given by the class on Christian evidences combined with estimates given me later by some 12 different classes of college students representing more than 600 students. I have carefully weighed the estimates and have changed some to make them even more conservative. The point being that if you're going to do a statistical probability, you want to remove all doubt that you skewed this in your own favor, in the favor of the position you want to hold. And so he's going to make the estimates of the probabilities of fulfillment extremely conservative so that no one could argue with the results of the analysis. Now, what they decided to do was to look at just 8 fulfilled prophecies. Just 8. And to analyze each one of them separately and assign a probability of their fulfillment. So a prophecy is given. Was it fulfilled? If so, when and by whom? So we start with that analysis. The first prophecy they looked at, and we're going to walk through briefly each of these 8 prophecies. The first one, the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. It's a precise location. I mean, it's not like saying he would be born in Seattle. That's a pretty big area. This is Bethlehem, very much smaller by comparison. Over in Micah chapter 2, Micah chapter 2, where we have this prophecy given to us. Micah chapter 5 and verse 2. Let's get that clear. That'll be easier. Micah 5, verse 2. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from everlasting. That can only be a messianic prophecy. He's going to come forth from Bethlehem. The fulfillment of that, in one location, we'll read from Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. It says, now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born king of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired them where the Christ, the Messiah, was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. For thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. So we have a prophecy. We have Jesus Christ who fulfills that prophecy. So now we know we have an individual associated with that. Micah was written sometime between 730 and 750 BC. He was a contemporary of Isaiah. So this is before Israel goes in captivity to Assyria. All right? So how long before Christ is that? Well, that's ballpark, over 700 years before Jesus Christ is born. 700 years before the Messiah is born, a prophecy about where he would be born is given, that it would be Bethlehem. 700 years later, the Messiah is born in Bethlehem. What's the probability of that happening? Unless God makes it happen. Well, start with this question. What's the probability that you could have been born anywhere? That you could have decided to be born anywhere? Like, I know if I'm going to be the Messiah, I have to be born in Bethlehem, so I'm going to make sure I'm going to be born. How are you going to do that? I was born in Santa Rosa, but I would have preferred to be born in Vancouver. But I couldn't make that happen. Why? I'm not the boss of that. That's something to consider. Okay. The question is, now I'm going to move into what the study from this book reveals. He says, the question is, one man in how many men the world over has been born in Bethlehem? And the answer from the study is the following. Let me quote. It says, the best estimate which we can make of this comes from the attempt to find out the average population of Bethlehem from Micah down to the present time. So that would have been, let's say mid-700s BC up to the year 1958-ish. And divide it by the average population of the earth during the same period. One member of the class was an assistant in the library, so he was assigned to get this information. He reported at the next meeting that the best determination of the ratio that he could determine was 1 in 280,000. So that's the odds. 1 in 280,000 that a person, as it said, the question was, one man in how many men the world over has been born in Bethlehem? So since the mid-700 BC, it's 1 out of every 280,000 people has been born in Bethlehem. Okay. So that's the first prophecy, its fulfillment, and the statistical probability of it being fulfilled, 1 in 280,000. The second prophecy, a messenger would be sent ahead of the Messiah to prepare for his coming. We find Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, this prophecy, so the final book of the Old Testament, Malachi chapter 3, and verse 1, behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. And also, a second element from Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 3. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Okay, the prophecy that someone was going to come as a forerunner of Jesus Christ to prepare the way for his coming. Mark chapter 1, we'll read this in Mark chapter 1. We could do all of this in Matthew, but let's have some variety. Turn to Mark chapter 1. We'll read from verses 2 through 8. In verse 2 it says, it is written in the prophets, behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. John came baptizing in the wilderness and preaching a baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. Then all of the land of Judea and those from Jerusalem went out to him and were all baptized by him in the Jordan River, confessing their sins. Now John was clothed with camel's hair and with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey, and he preached, saying, there comes one after me, who is mightier than I, whose sandal strap I am not worthy to stoop down to loose. I indeed baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. A forerunner of the Messiah, preparing the way, making straight the paths before him. So here we have two prophets who were not contemporary with one another. Isaiah prophesying in the mid-700s BC, before and during, essentially, right before especially the Israel goes into captivity. When did Micah, or excuse me, in this case we were dealing with Malachi. So when did Malachi prophesy? Malachi was the final prophet of the Old Testament. So the final writings were being done by Ezra and Nehemiah, and so Micah or Malachi would have been prophesying just before them. So that would have placed him in the at least the mid 400s BC. All right, there was no prophet after Malachi. So that's 300 years. So we have 700 years in Isaiah. We have 300 years in Malachi, all before the Messiah, prophesying of a forerunner who would come to announce the way of the Messiah. The question now is, of the men who have been born in Bethlehem, one man in how many has had a forerunner to prepare his way? So of the men born in Bethlehem, that's 1 in 280,000. How many of those would have had a forerunner? From the book, quoting, it says, John the Baptist, of course, was the forerunner of Christ. But since there appears to be no material difference between the people born in Bethlehem and those born in any other place in the world, the question can just as well be general. One man in how many the world over has had a forerunner to prepare his way? Essentially, anywhere has this happened before. He goes on, the student said that the prophecy apparently referred to a special messenger of God whose one duty was to prepare the way for the work of Christ. So there is a further restriction added. The students finally agreed that 1 in 1,000 as being extremely conservative. Most of the members thought the estimate should be much larger. So he's explaining that this extremely low ratio the students settled on is 1 person in 1,000 out of 280,000 out of the world over has a chance to have that happen. That is ridiculously silly low as estimates go. Someone going before you to prepare the way for you. Is that to announce your arrival, that you will be arriving soon? Who would need such a service? So think about, I've been thinking about it, contemplating on that issue alone. Who needs that? Like, even to be fulfilled, other than God saying this was going to happen, who would need such a thing? Like, you'd need somebody to go before you to announce that you're coming. Why? Do you have some urgent message that they need to hear, that you need a forerunner for? So in other words, that's why it's so conservative. It's ridiculously conservative about how this might actually happen to somebody. All right, let's look at the third one. So you have your numbers now. We have 1 in 280,000, then we have 1 in 1,000. The third prophecy, the Messiah would enter Jerusalem on a donkey. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, where it says, Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. So it's actually more specific. It's not just someone riding in on a donkey. It's someone as a king or a ruler. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. We can find its fulfillment in Matthew chapter 21. Matthew chapter 21, the first 11 verses here, beginning in verse 1. It says, Now when they drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied, and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, you shall say, The Lord has need of them, and immediately he will send them. All this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, Tell the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you, lowly and sitting on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. So the disciples went and did as Jesus commanded them. They brought the donkey and the colt, laid their clothes on them, and set him on them. And a very great multitude spread their clothes on the road. Others cut down branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Then the multitudes who went before and those who followed cried out, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. And when he had come into Jerusalem, all the city was moved, saying, Who is this? So the multitude said, This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth of Galilee. So Christ himself fulfills this prophecy to the letter. What are the odds that someone could do that, could make that happen? What are the odds that that would happen? Something prophesied in the Old Testament, fulfilled in the New, by anyone. Now, Zechariah wrote this prophecy during the time of Zerubbabel. Now, he was the governor of Judea when Judah was returned from captivity from Babylon. That would have begun about 538 BC. The temple was believed to be done about 516 BC, this ballpark here. And Zerubbabel was overseeing that as the governor. And so during that time, Zechariah was prophesying because there was a bit of a window of laziness where people had stopped focusing on the temple and were focusing on themselves. So that would have been about, ballpark then, 500 years earlier. So 500 years before the event where someone is prophesied to be born in Bethlehem, to have a forerunner go before them, and to come riding into Jerusalem as a king on a donkey. What are the chances? Quoting from the book, our question then is, one man in how many who was born in Bethlehem and had a forerunner did enter Jerusalem as a king riding on a colt, the foal of a donkey? This becomes so restrictive that we should consider an equivalent question. One man in how many who has entered Jerusalem as a ruler has entered riding on a colt, the foal of a donkey? The students said that this was a very hard thing to place an estimate on. They knew of no one but Christ who had so entered. The students thought that at least in more modern times, anyone entering Jerusalem as a king would use a more dignified means of transportation. Makes sense to me. They agreed to place an estimate of 1 in 10,000. 1 in 10,000 people. That seems pretty conservative. Dr. Stoner says, we will use 1 in 100. We will use 1 in 100. Are you kidding me? 1 in 100 people this could happen to? Okay, I was thinking about this. How many people live in Bothell? Do you guys know? Current population, if you had to guess, I'll just tell you, 47,000. Okay, I looked it up. 47,000 people live in Bothell right now. It's a suburb of Seattle. Same thing as Bethlehem to Jerusalem. If we do the math correct, he says 100 people could qualify for this criteria. Imagine 470 people, all born in Bothell, over any time period, all traveled to the same place in Seattle on a bus. All had someone go before them to tell everyone they were coming. But wait, add to that these same 470 people came to Seattle as rulers or leaders. What are the chances? Now add to that someone over 500 years ago accurately predicted this to happen. The fourth prophecy. The Messiah would be betrayed by a friend, resulting in his hands being wounded. The Messiah would be betrayed by a friend, resulting in his hands being wounded. We go back to Zechariah chapter 13. Zechariah chapter 13 this time, and verse 6. So Zechariah 13:6, and one will say to him, what are these wounds between your arms? Okay, I'm reading the New King James. What does the Old King James say? It says, and one shall say unto him, what are these wounds in thine hands? It was specific to his hands, not his arms. Then he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. So someone from the house of my friends would be the cause, is what that says. Psalms 41. Add to this, Psalm 41. and verse 9. Psalm 41 and verse 9. Even my own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, who ate my bread and lifted up his heel against me. So we have the two issues here. A friend of the Messiah would betray him, and the result of that betrayal would be that his hands would be wounded. Now that's really specific. You know, I Googled that. Just thinking to myself, that is such a specific thing. And betrayal is very unique. Let me tell you the answer is zero. There's not anything that Google could find anywhere that says that has ever happened to anyone except Christ. I'm just putting that out there. Let's look at its fulfillment. Luke chapter 22, verse 3. Luke chapter 22 and verse 3. So we're going to pick up both elements in two passages. So Luke 22 first, to make this very clear. In verse 3, then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So we have evidence that Judas Iscariot was one of the 12 disciples, the friends of Christ. All right? Now Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26, verses 47 through 50. And while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude, with swords, clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, whomever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him. Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Now what did Christ call him? But Jesus said to him, friend, why have you come? This buttons up the question. Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, was the friend of Christ. Now it also said that his hands would be wounded. John chapter 20. John chapter 20, verse 24. And I'm going to read through 27. Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So when Jesus was ascended to the Father and came back down on that Sunday, during the days of unleavened bread, this was when he was witnessed by people directly, and he showed himself to the disciples, except one person. Thomas was not there that day. Verse 25, the other disciples therefore said to him, we have seen the Lord. So he said to them, unless I see in his hands the print of the nails. Hands, nails, holes, wounds. And put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. And after 8 days his disciples were there again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst and said, peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, reach your finger here and look at my hands, and reach your hand here and put it in my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And so Christ manifests himself physically again and says, look, you wanted to see the holes in my hands, the wounds in my hands, as prophesied. Here they are. Now, Psalm 41 was written in very rough numbers around 1000 BC by King David. So approximately 1,000 years before this event would have happened, this is being prophesied by King David in the Psalms. Zechariah was written over 500 years before the birth of the Messiah. But this prophecy, of course, is more specific regarding the harm that would come to the Messiah's hands as a result of betrayal. So two men who lived 500 years apart from one another both prophesied about Judas Iscariot's betrayal of Jesus Christ. What are the chances? They didn't know one another. David certainly wouldn't have known Zechariah, who lived after him. Okay. Quoting from the book, there seems to be no relation between the fulfillment of this prophecy and those which we have previously considered, meaning this prophecy doesn't require a contingent that they be born in Bethlehem. There's no preceding requirement in it. It's simply saying the Messiah, these things would happen to the Messiah. So he's saying we have to be honest about that. There seems to be no relation between the fulfillment of this prophecy and those which we have previously considered. We may then ask the question, one man in how many the world over has been betrayed by a friend, and that betrayal has resulted in his being wounded in his hands? The student said that it was very rare to be betrayed by a friend, and still rarer for the betrayal to involve wounding in the hands. 1 in 1,000 was generally agreed upon, though most of the students would have preferred a larger number. Like I said, I tried Googling that idea, and there's just nothing ever recorded anywhere at any time except for Christ that this has happened. Okay, the fifth prophecy. The Messiah would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Now, that is also in Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 11, verse 12. Zechariah 11, verse 12. Then I said to them, if it is agreeable to you, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And, well, stop there. We're going to get to the next verse, because it's a separate prophecy. The Messiah would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Very specific amount. All right, the fulfillment, Matthew chapter 26. We're all familiar with this, no doubt, but it's really good for us to just make sure we nail this down. So, Matthew chapter 26, beginning in verse 14 through 16. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests, and he said, what are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you? And they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time on, he sought opportunity to betray him. Again, 500 years before it happened, Zechariah prophesied that the Messiah would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. And this, of course, is extremely specific. How would you be able to manufacture that scenario? The question here is very simple, according to the book. The question here is very simple. Of the people who have been betrayed, one in how many has been betrayed for exactly 30 pieces of silver? The students thought this would be extremely rare and set their estimate as 1 in 10,000. We will use 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000 that this situation could have happened by random chance or by somebody trying to make it happen. 1 in 1,000. That's silly, to be honest with you. The odds of that happening would be the same as 47 random people in Bothell having been betrayed by a friend for the exact same amount of money, the value of which was determined 500 years ago. It's impossible. Prophecy number 6. What are the chances? The price of the betrayal would be thrown down and used to buy a potter's field. Now that's a remarkable prophecy. Try to envision what that would look like 500 years before it happened. The price of betrayal would be thrown down in the temple, and then that money would be used to buy a field from the potter. Which potter? What field? How much money would it be worth 500 years from now? So now we're still here in Zechariah. Well, if you want to keep your place there, that might have been good. I should have told you that. Zechariah 11:13 says, and the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that princely price they set on me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter. That's the prophecy. The fulfillment, Matthew chapter 27. Verses 3 through 10. Matthew 27, 3 through 10. I'll start here in verse 3. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful, and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? You see to it. Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, because they are the price of blood. And they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Okay, so that's the prophecy and its fulfillment again. Very specific set of circumstances. The question here would be of the critic who says the Bible is not legitimately the Word of God. These are just random people, and a bunch of zealots put it all together and called it the Word of God. We have a very specific prophecy and its fulfillment. To believe that, you'd have to believe that somehow the chief priests conspired to help Christ look like the Messiah. They did not want Jesus Christ to be the Messiah, right? He was in all manner appearing to be the Messiah, and they did not want him to be what he claimed to be. Do you think they would have willingly participated? Do you think they had the scriptures? The answer is they would not want to have willingly participated in making him look even more like the Messiah, so they would not have wanted to do things that the prophecy said were going to happen, and yet they did exactly that. Think they couldn't read Zechariah and know what its prophecies were? Of course they had that. So the idea that they would have conspired it doesn't add up to the facts. Okay. Dr. Stoner summarizes the scope of the probability issues with this. He says, our question is, one man and how many, after receiving a bribe for the betrayal of a friend, had returned the money, had it refused, then threw it down on the floor in the house of the Lord, and then had it used to purchase a field from the potter. The students said they doubted if there has ever been any other incident involving all of these items, but they agreed on an estimate of 1 in 100,000. 1 in 100,000. They were very sure this was conservative. But I was thinking to myself, how do you negotiate a bribe to betray an innocent person? Then after changing your mind, you go back to the payee to return the money. They reject taking it back. Then you throw the money on the floor of a special house prearranged, apparently. And finally, they decide to buy a piece of land with the money, the amount of which matched the value of the bribe, all of which was predicted 500 years ago. Like, no way. It can't be. What are the chances? Okay, prophecy number 7. The Messiah would keep silent during his trial. Again, these are the 8 prophecies, these 7 of the 8 prophecies so far that the students and the instructor picked. So we're simply going through the 8 that they chose. This is the 7th that they chose. The Messiah would keep silent during his trial. This comes from Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 and verse 7. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearer is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Its fulfillment, Matthew chapter 26, verses 62 and 63. And the high priest arose. Matthew 26, verse 62 and 63. The high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Son of God, if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Okay, so at the trial portion, he has liars testifying against him, and he does not testify in his own defense. If somebody were going to try to make this true, as the critic might assume has happened, I think to myself, how do you get yourself arrested and convicted by perjury for a crime you didn't commit? I mean, that's Agatha Christie stuff. It's pure fiction for us. And if you're innocent and you're being accused of doing something that you didn't do, which of us says, I didn't, which of us sits silently while people lie about us and don't try to defend ourselves? It's a remarkable idea that Christ did it in this fashion, willingly going as a sheep before the shearers. So he says, we'll use 1 in 1,000 with regard to this. I'm sorry, he says, one man in how many? Let me read, I'm sorry, I distracted myself. It says, here's the analysis from the book. It says, one man in how many, after fulfilling the above prophecies, when he is oppressed and afflicted and is on trial for his life, though innocent, will make no defense for himself. Again, my students said they did not know that this had ever happened in any case other than Christ's. At least it is extremely rare, so they placed their estimate at 1 in 10,000. We will use 1 in 1,000. So again, he continues to skew the analysis to the more conservative estimates of probability. And this becomes important later when we look at the summation of the math. Again, the probability of an innocent person sitting silent in a trial for their life must be pretty close to 0 in my mind. But here we have an estimate. I think to myself, what are the chances? The final prophecy they looked at, number 8. The Messiah would be crucified. This is a very specific form of death. Now, this becomes very important when you consider when the prophecy for it was written. Psalms chapter 22. Psalms chapter 22, another psalm of David, so approximately 1,000 years before Christ was born. And verse 16, there are 5 prophecies, messianic prophecies in this chapter alone. They picked one, verse 16. For dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. Now that's very specific to the way Christ died. They pierced his hands and feet. Okay. 1,000 years before this was born, there was no such thing as crucifixion. The earliest recording that we have, archaeologically, the evidence that we have about crucifixion is from around the 6th century BC in Persia. And of course, by the time of Christ, it was quite prevalent. But at the time of David, no one had ever heard of crucifixion. This wasn't an invented thing. It wasn't a way of doing it. The Persians did it because they thought that the guilty person, the evil person, would desecrate the ground. So they crucified them above the ground and kept them there until they died. That was a very unique way of viewing it, and that's how it was supposedly developed. All right. According to the book, the Jews are still looking for the coming of Christ, meaning the Jews do not believe Jesus Christ was the Messiah, so therefore they are still looking for the Messiah. So if they are the critic, we are answering, then we must evaluate the criteria, including what they assume. The Jews are still looking for the coming of Christ. In fact, he might have come any time after these prophecies were written, up to the present time, or even on into the future. So our question is, one man in how many from the time of David on has been crucified? After studying the methods of execution down through the ages and their frequency, the students agreed to estimate this probability at 1 in 10,000. 1 in 10,000. Okay. So we have 8 prophecies of Jesus Christ, all fulfilled by Jesus Christ. Well, let me back up. We have 8 messianic prophecies, prophecies of the coming of the Messiah. We have Jesus Christ fulfilling 8, those same 8 prophecies of the Messiah. This analysis so far has been about assigning probabilities of fulfillment of each of these 8 prophecies independent of one another. Okay, that someone could fulfill this one, and that someone could fulfill this one. Someone could fulfill this one. Okay, we did that through the first 8. So far that it is possible for that to happen. The probability that any one man could have fulfilled any of these 8 prophecies, that's what we've looked at. And those probabilities are assigned each independently. Here's from the book. If these estimates are considered fair, then the question is, one man in how many men the world over will fulfill all 8 prophecies? So one man, all 8. 5 plus 3. The question can be answered by applying our principles of probability. In other words, by multiplying all of our estimates together, or 1 in 280,000 times 1,000 times 100 times 1,000 times 1,000 times 10,000 times 1,000 times 10,000. This gives us 1 in 1 followed by 28 zeros. So 28 zeros. This is the initial probability calculation. Remember, they're trying to be conservative. They've already been conservative, but 1 in 1 with 28 zeros after it. I wish I could write that number out so you could see just how absurdly large that number is. It's extremely large. The number is called 10 nonillion for you math nerds, okay? 10 nonillion. 28 zeros is nonillion, just in case you wanted to know. This is the answer to the question. Now, going on, he says, but we are really concerned with the answer to the question, what is the chance that any man might have lived from the day of these prophecies down to the present time and have fulfilled all of the 8 prophecies? We can answer this question by dividing our 1 followed by 28 zeros by the number of people who have lived since the time of these prophecies. The best information available indicates that's about 88 billion. And so that results in 1 followed by 11 zeros. You divide one by the other, and we end up with a net probability of one man from the time the prophecies were written until today of 1 followed by 17 zeros. 1 followed by 17 zeros. So you understand what a million looks like. So 1 followed by, I have to get this right. Is it 6 zeros? Yes, that's a million. Billion is 9 zeros, right? Trillion is 12 zeros. What's after a trillion? That's 15 zeros. What's after that? So 1 in 17 is over a quadrillion, something like that. I mean, these numbers are so big you can't. It's hard to picture them. All right, so let me help with that picturing thing. What's this probability question? What are the chances that one person could do this on their own? So if I take a bowl, a hat or a bowl or whatever, and I put 10 silver dollars and I mark 1 silver dollar in that bowl, and I walked over to you, held it above your head so you couldn't see, said, just reach in there and pick one and see if you can pick the marked one. If there's 10 in there and you get, then what are your chances of getting the right one? 1 in 10. 1 in 10. Okay. We have 1 in 1 followed by 17 zeros instead of 10. Okay? So, what did that look like? All right, so if I took a silver dollar, if I took 1 followed by 17 zeros worth of silver dollars, and I spread them across the face of Washington, from Canada to Oregon, from Idaho to the coast, it would cover the state of Washington nearly 4 feet deep, coin to coin, no gaps. Okay? Can you see that in your head? The entire surface of the state of Washington covered in silver dollars 4 feet deep. Now, I blindfold you, drop you off anywhere in the state you say, you wander as long as you would like, you stop, you reach down, you're blindfolded because this is random. You reach down someplace within that 4 feet, you pull up a silver dollar. What are the chances that it's the marked silver dollar? 1 followed by 17 zeros. Now, if you're like some can be on this question when you're trying to visualize something this big, God gets the 1 with the 17 zeros. Satan, chance, luck, they get the 1. So now you can see in your head the chances that it being anything other than God having prophesied what would happen and then having inspired the fulfillment of the prophecy is 17 zeros after a 1 that God did that, and it's 1 that he didn't. Okay, that's just 8. Do you know how many messianic prophecies there are? Alfred Edersheim estimates that there are over 300 messianic prophecies, all fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So what Dr. Stoner did was he said, okay, well, let's just see how silly the math can get. What are the chances that one man could fulfill 16? 16 of the prophecies, not 300, 16. The numbers start to get a little mind-blowing here. It's 1 followed by 45 zeros. 1 followed by 45 zeros. Can you picture that many zeros written out? You can go ahead and try and write it out on your paper so you get a sense of how many zeros we're talking about. Okay, so I took 3 AI engines and I entered into all 3 of them separately to try to figure out how much this was. I started with the first one I was using because I'm not doing this math. I am not a math guy. I use ChatGPT. I'm going to be honest about that for all the math. And then I double-checked ChatGPT with Copilot, and I checked that with Gemini. So I feel pretty good about all this. So Chat says, okay, I said, Chat, cover the face of Washington in 1 followed by 45 zeros worth of silver dollars. Too small. Okay, cover the United States. Too small. Cover the world. Too small. Okay, take every planet in the solar system and cover all of them. Too small. Add the sun. Too small. Okay, ChatGPT, if we made a sphere of silver dollars, of 1 followed by 45 zeros worth of silver dollars. If we built a sphere that large around the solar system, how big would it be? ChatGPT says 398 times larger than the volume of our solar system. 398 times the volume, larger than the volume of our solar system. Now, if I get in my happy spaceship and I drag you in, put you in a spaceship or spacesuit, blind you, fly any direction you want for as long as you want, you tell me to stop. You get out, you grab a silver dollar. What are the chances that that's the one and only marked silver dollar? Because God gets the 45 zeros, Satan, chance, and luck get the 1. That's the chances. That's the odds. Which are you willing to bet is right? God and his 45 zeros, or Satan and his 1 against? They went out and did the math to 48 prophecies. I won't go into it because the explanation of how impossible that is would blow your mind. We can't conceive of these numbers. What are we to conclude? That it is impossible that God did not inspire the Old Testament prophecies of Jesus Christ, and that he did not also inspire their fulfillment. It's impossible that that didn't happen. It is only possible that God did prophesy and ensure the prophecies were fulfilled. Only God could have done that. Think about the magnitude of that. When there's somebody who criticizes or who thinks that this is not the legitimate word of God, he proved it beyond all reasonable doubt. Beyond all reasonable doubt. As I said, why all this math? Because I want you to be absolutely certain that the Bible is the inspired word of God, and that every prophecy and its fulfillment proves that the Bible is true, that Christ is our Messiah, and that God is truly awesome.